Hey everybody, Tim Albrecht here, and welcome to this week's episode of the Ask a YFP CFP segment of the Your Financial Pharmacist Podcast, where we feature questions from you, the YFP community, to be answered by one of YFP Planning's fee-only certified financial planners. Before we jump into today's question, I want to give a shout out to YFP Planning's incredible financial planning team that makes this segment possible. YFP Planning offers fee-only comprehensive financial planning services that are customized to the pharmacy professional. You can learn more and book a free discovery call by visiting yfpplanning.com. Again, that's yfpplanning.com. Okay, this week's question comes from Rachel in Spartanburg, South Carolina.
Hello, my name is Rachel and I am from Spartanburg, South Carolina. The question I have today is regarding FMLA and income supplementation during that time off. I will be facing an FMLA leave from work at the end of May, and my current employer doesn't offer any type of supplementation during that time off. I do have about 1 week accrued time off for sick pay that I will be able to use. However, that will leave me with about 4 to 5 weeks without income. My question is regarding what resources are out there, whether it be short-term disability or other resources for folks in my situation that are facing an extended period of time without income while on FMLA. I am the sole provider for a family of 6, so this is a very important situation for me. And so any advice or input that you have would be greatly appreciated. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Rachel, for submitting your question to be featured on this week's Ask a YFP CFP segment of the podcast. Tim Baker, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so this is a great question. And I think this is kind of the importance of working through a plan is when you have something that could ultimately threaten the longevity of a plan. There's a stat out there that says 62% of personal bankruptcies are filed in the United States. So personal bankruptcies that are filed in the United States are attributed to a medical problem. And that's not to say that this is the case for Rachel, but I think looking at all the different levers to pull with regard to how to kind of get through this 4 to 5 weeks without income is going to be crucial. So just to kind of back up, when we talk about the Family Medical Leave Act, FMLA, which sometimes people get twisted, is that all of that law does is essentially protect your job. So it's an unpaid leave. So what was happening was, women might go out on, a maternity leave, or I get sick and I'm out for an extended period of time, and the employer would go behind me and basically fill my job, and then I was left without a job. So the federal government stepped in and said, like, that's not cool. So we have this law that basically says that you get 12 weeks of unpaid leave, which is just basically job protected, and that's on a per year basis. So what that means is that you're kind of left to your own devices to make sure that if you have a loss, and maybe this isn't a catastrophic loss, but you have 4 to 5 weeks without income, you kind of have to fend for yourself. Now, there are certain things, such as like an FMLA loan, government assistance, which is like food stamps. There are state disability programs, and these are more in like states like California, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island, Washington. Social Security, but that's typically for disabilities of 12 months or longer. Workers' comp, if your accident or your medical is attributed to an on-the-job thing. Those are all programs out there that are usually either around the idea of you being a caretaker, or it's kind of a prolonged thing. So I would probably go through each of those just to see if that would be a possibility, but I'm thinking it probably wouldn't. And remind you, you're not going to get unemployment because you have a job, which is protected by by FMLA. So I think some of the things that I would pull, if I'm working with this client, some of the levers that I'm going to pull is some of the things that, Rachel, you're doing already. So like looking at vacation time, sick leave. The question I would ask your employer is there a policy for you to kind of go into a deficit to borrow against your 2023 leave? So some employers allow you to take, say, 40 hours. So that might cut that 4 to 5 weeks down to 3 to 4 weeks, so to speak. So can you run a deficit against your future leave? Obviously, the big thing here from, looking at your balance sheet, this is what the emergency fund is for. So every time we get salty about, oh man, I have X amount of dollars just sitting in a bank account, not really doing anything. The not really doing anything this is that rainy day. This is that break the glass. We need to dip into the emergency fund to kind of, make it through that period. Now, if that's not there, there are other things that you could potentially look at. So the one, that's out there is short-term disability. So most people don't carry their own short-term disability policies because they're kind of cross prohibitive. I'd rather you just have your own, kind of buffered emergency fund, but your employer may offer that as a benefit. And really what we're trying to get here is 60% of your gross that'll pay you from that time period of when you go out. And then there's some type of elimination period. So it might say, hey, your disability, you got to wait 2 weeks and then you can apply for it. And then you'll get paid from 2 weeks to, 90 days out. That's would be great if you had that. If you don't have that, you could also look at a long-term disability policy that you have through your employer. I'm thinking that because you're asking the question, you probably don't have your own policy, but this is another reason why I think carrying your own policy is not going to help you in this situation, but moving forward is going to be important. So typically with a long-term disability policy, Tim, you have an elimination period, which in a lot of times it's 90 days, sometimes it's 180 days. So you have to, you're disabled, you wait 90 days, and then you start receiving payments. Typically, we want to see about 60% of gross. So if you make $100,000, $60,000 divided by 12 or how many pay periods. The other thing that I would look at, Rachel, would be your investment account. So obviously, in this space, you're probably going to want to turn off all contributions. So even if you have a match to, say, a 401k, you probably want to just shut that down. So if you're putting money into an HSA, a brokerage account, a 401k, IRAs, I would just, savings account, I would just, make sure that we're not doing that anymore. But then look at those accounts in terms of, is there liquidity there? So like if you have an HSA account, can we use that to maybe offset medical bills that you have? If you have a brokerage account, right now it's not a great time to redeem investments because the market is down. But you're going to avoid any type of penalties if you have, say, $10,000, hanging in a brokerage account. Is there a possibility to take a 401k loan? So typically, what you have vested in your 401k, you can take 50% of that. So if you have $80,000, you can take a loan out for $40,000. Now you have to pay that back in the future with interest. Then you're paying yourself interest, but that's going to come out of your paycheck. So you're kind of, robbing Peter to pay Paul a little bit. And then the other place I would look at is Roth, your Roth account. So you could take your basis anytime without tax or penalty. So your basis meaning the amount of money that you contribute into your account. So let's say last year I put $5,000 in, and this year I put $5,000 in. My basis is 10. Now there could be $12,000 in there. I just can't touch that without that 2,000 without a penalty. So that's another. Now, and then probably the last thing, and I wouldn't say that these are in any particular order, but probably the last thing that you're going to look at is just debt. And I would try to say, like, what is some sensible debt you can work through? So if you do have medical debt, I would probably lean towards that versus putting a medical bill on a credit card. Typically, medical debt, because the laws have changed over time, they're going to be less ornery with regard to your credit, and they'll typically work with you to get you on type of a payment plan before it goes to a collection process. And the rates aren't typically going to be like what you see for maybe a personal loan or a credit card, but those are other things: personal loans, credit cards, especially if you know it's going to be for a shorter period of time, maybe get a 0% rate for a little bit until you come out of that. The other thing I would tap into probably even before, a personal loan or credit card is if you own your home, equity in your home, either a second mortgage or opening up a home equity line of credit, which is kind of like a credit card that is basically backed by the value of your home that you can access and pay back when you have a balance there. And then probably the last thing, which is kind of more along the lines of it's debt, but it's kind of social insurance, is family. Are there people out there that you can lean on? We see lots of that when sometimes when times are tough, or like a GoFundMe page, that's just another really type of insurance. Not necessarily something that, would be pleasant to do, but, and probably not necessarily something that you would need to do in a 4 to 5 week stretch. But those would be all the different levers I would pull. I think, when I see, hey, I'm the sole breadwinner for a family of 6, like my eyes widen, and I'm like, oh, like I want to make sure that, we can keep the lights on, food on the table, as you kind of get through this time of need. So, Rachel, I wish you the best of luck, and hopefully, we kind of can figure that out as you kind of move forward with this medical issue.
Yeah, this is a great question, Tim. One we haven't talked about in detail on the show before. And I know Rachel mentioned in her question that she was going to be facing this leave at the end of May. So here we are, obviously in the month of June, heading into July. But I think this question, hopefully will be of value to Rachel, but also others that are listening that might be facing a similar situation. And what I love about the approach that you just took, Tim, was let's look at all the options that are on the table. And perhaps some of them make sense, some don't. Maybe we're comfortable, some we're not comfortable with others. But I think especially in a time like this where there perhaps is stress that is, surrounding the situation, making sure we're objectively trying to evaluate the options that are out there and talking through the pros and cons of those, and that we feel good about the path and the solution forward. So Rachel, again, really appreciate you taking time to submit the question on this week's Ask a YFP CFP segment of the podcast. We're going to be sending you a super comfy YFP t-shirt. And for folks that are listening, we'd love to feature your question on an upcoming show. You can submit that question by sending us an email at info@yourfinancialpharmacist.com, or you can record your question by visiting yourfinancialpharmacist.com/ask YFP. As we wrap up this week's episode, an important reminder that the content in this podcast is provided to you for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. For more information, you can visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thanks again for listening, and have a great rest of your week.